Okay, hello, hi, yeah, it's me again, Shield Maiden. Right, I'm going to carry on reading from where I left off yesterday. So sorry about that. It was, something disturbed me, so I had to stop reading. And, but I do know where I left off because I put the page down. Where is it? Oh, there it is, there it is. Okay, here we go. I first left home when I was 15. I was a runaway possessed. My mother died and I fled, inhabited by a demon or a god. I didn't know which, who whispered, "Go, go, now, while they're too busy to notice and to stop you." That was my mourning for my mother, to run, wild and angry, out of Bethany and towards Jerusalem. Looking back at the fierce brown girl, I feel nothing but pity for now. I believed with all the foolishness of wilful ignorance that my strong fleet legs carried me towards freedom and away from this prospect of betrothal and marriage, which I feared greatly, towards a life I could construct for myself and call my own. I ran from the authority of the men of my own village, only to encounter that of the men on the road. The merchants I met were friendly at first, giving me wine and food, suggesting I travel with them and offering me their protection on the road to the coast, telling me of the oils and spices and raw silks they had bought in the east and were carrying to Alexandria to sell. I decided to accompany them, turning my back on the holy city of Jerusalem and dreaming instead of the great white shining capital the merchants described to me. That night, my first night on the road, they raped me, one after the other. There were 4 of them. I fought and shrieked, but desisted when a knife was held to my throat. There was only one sort of woman, they told me, who roamed about boldly and alone. I understood them to mean wild beast in need of taming. Thus I was initiated into what my mother had taught me was the sacred mysteries of womanhood. I was brutalized, but I was freed. None of the honourable men at home would ever take me to wife now. At Caesarea, we took ship. I paid with my body, the only coin I had, for my safe passage to Alexandria. The merchants laughed and joked as they used me, telling me how, once we arrived, they would sell me off to one of the brothels near the harbour for the sailors to sport with. I have used you too, I thought, to bring me thus far, and we are even now. We came ashore on a mild evening, a cool wind blowing off the sea, and sought an inn. At first I was too dazzled by the great buildings all around me to notice anything. Then one of my companions pointed out to the prostitutes who slunk along an alley to our right and lifted their faces to the fresh air and to the men who passed. There were no other women abroad, and these had a puzzling uniformity. They all had blonde hair flowing in long curls and wore scarlet tunics. "State regulations," one of the merchants said, watching my face. "Blonde wigs and scarlet robes so that everyone knows who they are. This is the only time of day they are allowed out. You'd like that, Mary, wouldn't you? To become one of the dactyliates." "We shall arrange it tomorrow." I smiled at him. "Let us have one last evening together," I proposed. "All of us together as old travelling companions. Then I shall accept what the morrow brings." We were passing the brothel where these poor women lodged. On the door was painted a mighty erect phallus, so that all might know what went on inside. and there was a stream of men going in and out. I shuddered, and some of them shouted at me in a strange tongue, and the merchants gripped me by both arms. I made sure that all 4 of them drank deeply that night, and drank enough myself to deaden the pain in my heart, as one after one oath after one after the other approached me. Afterwards I made them drink more, so that they forgot to bind me as they had sworn to do, and instead sank snoring onto their mattresses. I stood and watched them. I wanted to kill them as they slept, but feared the noisy struggle that might ensue. The innkeeper wakened. My capture and arrest. I vomited over their legs instead. Then I washed my face and hands, stripped off my clothes and those of one of the sleeping men, dressed myself as a boy, took a knife and a small bag of money, and crept out of the inn. For 2 days I wandered in the Jewish quarter, speaking to others only in order to buy a little food. Hiding myself as much as possible, I tried to decide what I should do next. At night I slept in a barber's shop, I discovered, where there was no dog to alert the households. As I climbed in through the window, or when I left early in the morning. On the 3rd day, my meagre store of coins exhausted, I resolved to put my trust in God and to go exploring. Accordingly, I bent my steps in the direction of the city centre, marvelling at the width of the streets, the noise of men and horses and chariots, the magnificence of the houses, faced with gleaming white marble, the profusion of flowers in the gardens I passed. I reached a wide square where shopkeepers and traders had spread out their goods on the shining pavement, and loitered a little, wanting to enjoy my unaccustomed freedom, to bask in the sun and the liberty my new clothes gave me, to watch the busy scene before me as purchasers and storeholders haggled loudly over cloth, perfumes, baskets, pots and jewellery. I was more astonished than angered by the number of men who approached me to ask the price of my favours. They spoke in Greek, a language I had never learned though many Jews did. But I was left in no doubt of the import of their words, for they came up to me with smiles and held my hand softly and stroked my face and my thigh. Each time I shook my head and moved away, and each time a tingle of amusement ran through me as I reflected on the success of my disguise. The men at home did not have such tastes. Such practices were frowned upon by our people as perversions. Still, I could not help liking the frankness with which the citizens of Alexandria asked me for what they wanted, the ease and warmth of their manner. They were importunate. They turned away with a smile and a shrug when I indicated my refusal. At midday, the sun hot on my head, I sat down in the shade of the stone basin of a fountain, near enough to catch the cooling spray on my face. For a while I dozed and I dreamed. I dreamt of a great heap of rubbish formed all over the household refuge, thrown out by the slaves of all the houses in the city, bits of broken pot, scraps of torn cloth, vegetable peelings, wood shavings, human and animal excrement. This whole mass was slowly rotting and fermenting. I could see steam rising from it and understood how it might become a bonfire and break into flames and devour the city. Then I knew that the city in question was my own sacred city of Jerusalem, which I had never seen and now never would. On the top of the refuge heap, which had become a pyre, someone had abandoned a baby, a tiny girl who began to cry. I woke to find water on my face. The breeze of early afternoon had lifted the plume of the fountain so that it rained gently down on my cheeks. I shifted and blinked and got up to stretch my cramped legs. There was a woman standing next to me and frowning. I did not like to think she had observed me as I slept. She was tall and beautiful, some years older than me, and richly dressed in fine woolen robes with embroidery at the neck and hem. I've lost my bit where I am. With embroidery at the neck and the hem. First, the woman addressed me in Greek, and then, seeing my shrug of incomprehension in my own tongue, "You're a Jewess, aren't you?" she said. "Yet not a criticism. I can tell where you are from, little refugee." I thought she must be some sort of witch to divine so much. No one else in my 3 days here had so much as questioned my disguise. According to the indifferent or not so indifferent glances of passers-by, I had been merely another pretty boy. My legs shook under me, but I managed to stare back at her, wondering at her fluency in my language. "If I had not guessed your identity," she remarked, "someone else would soon would have done, and perhaps someone who might do you harm." She held out her hand to me and spoke coaxingly, and her voice took on an accent of great sweetness and charm. "Come home with me. Come and tell me your story and be my guest." I went. I did not know what else to do. "My name is Sibylla," she told me as we walked along. Not my real name, of course. I came from Rhodes originally, but I thought a Roman name would bring me good luck. Her house was reached through a doorway in an otherwise blank wall faced with marble. A short hall led to an open court. I gasped with pleasure at the sun streaming down onto the tiny garden in the centre ablaze with lilies and roses. The air scented with myrtle and lemon, and the peacefulness and seclusion of the place disturbed only by the sound of fountains splashing and some caged birds twittering next to it. Sibylla sent me off with one of her women to be washed and dressed and ordered food for me. She sat next to me while I ate and smiled as I cleared my bowl of beans and cabbage with all possible speed and held out my cup for more green wine. At first I was too hungry to be frightened in the presence of such a great lady, and too thankful to have escaped my merchant's captors in the port to worry about the new world in which I found myself. I already knew there would be no easy escape. I had seen a slave bolt the street door and pat the great dog that lay across the threshold. Alarm flickered in me only as I put down my spoon. Sibylla leaned forward and took my hand. I told her all my story without hesitation. Such was the power of her charm, of her smile. In any case, I believed I owed her some payment for the food and clothes she had bestowed on me. She listened intently as I spoke, and this flattered me and made me feel that I mattered again. No one had listened to me for a long time, and the need to be heard bursting out of me as soon as there was someone willing to hear all that I had to say made me so grateful to her that I knew I would do whatever she wished. "I think you and I could be useful to each other," she said at last. "If you wanted it. I am sometimes lonely here, despite all my visitors, and I need a woman companion who is not a slave. You could live here with me and serve me in return for food and clothes and lodgings, and I could teach you many helpful things. What do you say? Would you like that?" Again she patted my hand and smiled at me, and I fell forwards as I did so many onto the carpet of the soft promises she spread out before me. I stayed with Sibylla for 4 years. I owed her a great deal. In her way, too, she tamed me. but graciously and with some wit. She called me her little bear, her little refugee, her little thorn bush, and I submitted to these names because I grew to love her. She became my mother, my sister and a friend, as well as my mistress. She taught me to read and write the Greek script. She encouraged me to practice my singing and dancing. She instructed me in the arts of conversation and dalliance, the arrangement of hair and clothes, the exercise of the mind. All this was pleasant to me. Nor were my duties arduous. Most of the time, as she had said, she wanted me to act as her companion, to accompany her when she went shopping, to take messages for her, to make her garland from the flowers in the little garden, to sit with her while she gossiped or sang or read or played music with her many friends who delighted to visit her. When I joined our household, she had just taken a new lover, Marcus Linnæus, a centurion from the Roman garrison, a burly, short-spoken tower of a man who seemed always to smell of leather and sweat, and who had less money to spend on Sibylla than the Alexandrian nobleman she usually pleasured. I heard her friends laughing at her stupidity, but Sibylla took no notice, saying merely that she welcomed a change. Marcus came to visit her in the afternoons, which meant that at these times I was able to slip away in the company of one of the slaves and explore the city. Sometimes I went to the pleasure gardens in the park of Pan. Sometimes I visited the public court of the museum or the library. Sometimes I studied the statues and observed the rites in one or other of the many temples scattered through the city, dedicated to the worship of the various gods who met and mingled in the great metropolis. More and more often I found myself drawn to the promontory on one side of the great double harbour, from which I could look out to the lighthouse and open sea. I caught myself pretending I could see the shore of my own country and knew that I was homesick. At these times it comforted me to visit the temple of Demeter and Persephone, and to weep for my mother and the little house in Bethany I might never see again. Such is the power of this place and the attraction of the story of these two goddesses that one afternoon I took a boat along the canal to the suburb of Alexandria that had been named Eleusis, and the mysteries of Demeter and Persephone were enacted every year. The priestess would not allow me in further than the first gate of the temple complex, for I was too clearly a foreigner, and I returned to Sibylla's house confused and angry. I sat in the courtyard and watched the fish that flicked to and fro in the pool surrounding the fountain. I wondered why I never went to the Jews' quarters to worship with other Jews. I found the answer. I feared their horror at my way of life, driven out of my homeland by my own yearnings, separate from my own people by the life I had chosen. I felt there could, sorry, phone. Oh God. Right. Where am I? I can't find it now. Right. I sat in the courtyard and watched the fish that flicked to and fro in the pool surrounding the fountain. I wondered why I never went to the Jewish quarters to worship with other Jews. I found the answer. I feared the horror of my way of life, driven out of my homeland by my own yearnings, separate from my own people by the life I had chosen. I felt there could be no pity for my state, no compassion shown for my sorrow. To none of my own people could I reveal my heart. I was lonely and in a strange land. I wanted to cry, but did not, for Marcus Linnaeus came clattering down the shallow steps that led from Sibylla's quarters into the garden. I shrank, but he saw me. I smelt oily green wine on the great hairy arms that went around me, on the mouth that sought mine, and he pressed me to him till I thought my ribs would crack. I bit him hard on the neck and tore my nails down his down his bare arms. That excited him. He shook off my hands and wound his fingers in my hair. I screamed then, and Sibylla heard me and came running out from her rooms. Her robes clutched around her and her face white with fear. She joined her voice to mine, and as the dogs and the slaves came running, Marcus Linnaeus returned to his senses and let me go, though he was flushed with rage. After the slaves had bolted the street door behind him, Sibylla took me back into her quarter with her. I feared her anger or suspicion, but she was concerned only to console me and to find out whether I were hurt. I saw that there were tears in her eyes, and she held my hand for a long time. She showed me bruises on her arms where he had held her too hard, and red marks on her shoulders where he had bitten her and drawn blood. Not bites of love, she said, covering herself up again. He mistakes me for the spoils of war, I think. He is a greedy and impatient man. Are not your friends right, I ventured, when they urge you to choose a gentler lover? Why do you bother with men at all? For I knew that Sibylla had a very dear woman friend with whom she happily spent whole days and nights, whenever it was possible, a woman as cultivated and witty as herself, if not as beautiful. How would I live if I did not take a male lover? Sibylla asked me. How could you live, my little one? Marcus Linnaeus came to the house no more, for which I was grateful, and Sibylla took as her next lover a rich Alexandrian nobleman. One afternoon, when he was unable to visit her, she took me to bed with her instead. I had been trimming her toenails and rubbing her unguent of rose into her soles of her feet, when suddenly she bade me to stop. There is a robe I have bought for you, she said to me, smiling, which I should like you to try on. She got up and opened a chest and drew out a length of filmy white stuff, which flowed and billowed over her hand. Here is the dress, she said. Put it on. It was made of silk and was the richest garment I had ever worn. I stood there before Sibylla, clothed as she was, and saw how she wanted me to be like her in other ways too. I did not refuse. To lie in her arms all that afternoon brought me not just the sweetness of the pleasure of the body, but a lessening of the loneliness that gnawed my soul. She soothed away the pain and terror and humiliation I had suffered from the merchant's abuse of me, and she caresses the kind words built a protective wall between me and the degradations endured by the women in the houses and the ports. I began a new stage in my education. Sibylla taught me well. First of all, she taught me that life and love of the body is a noble thing, against which the intellect and the spirit need not wage war. She was a worldly woman, and she accepted the ways of her world, and remained a little apart from them even while enjoying them. She was scornful of my growing friendship with the household slave, who accompanied me to the various temples on my afternoon walks, saying that the mystery religions, with their secret and sometimes bloody rites, were for illiterates, fools, and barbarians and slaves only. Her friends read and discussed the different philosophies of the Greek school, and now she introduced me to them. It amused me to ask them questions concerning history and philosophy, which for the most part they answered with patience and courtesy. I kept silent concerning my own opinions, which were in a taste of change and commotion that sometimes frightened me, and listened all that I could. In secret, I continued my friendship with the female slave of the house, and learned from them no small part of the magic arts and the lore of herbs and healing, as well as whatever stories and details of their gods they could be persuaded to impart. I treasured up all these different forms of knowledge in my heart and reflected often upon them. The idea began to occur to me, at first only occasionally, and then with increasing frequency, that Sibylla was preparing me to become a hetaria like herself. Several of the men who came to the house ostensibly to visit her made no secret of their liking for me, and she made no attempt to dissuade them or to deflect their interest. I argued with myself in private about what I should do. I owed Sibylla a debt of gratitude, not just for saving me from a life of squalor and destitution, but for providing me, for 4 years now, with shelter, food and clothing. I could not pretend to myself that I had earned my keep. I had been Sibylla's friend, a little more. It was hardly surprising that she should begin to wish that I might bring more money into the household. She said nothing of all of this to me, but I guessed it. I did not fear the life she had led, and I could hardly condemn a way of making money that had so benefited me. Necessity drove her to it, since she was not married and had no way of becoming so. If I were to stay in Alexandria, an unmarried woman, necessity would dictate that I should behave as she did. There was great pleasure in her life, I knew, for the mind as much as for the body, and some freedom, and not too much sorrow. Yet the thought of spending the rest of my life in this house, or one similar to it, made me itch with dissatisfaction. With one part of myself, I was ashamed of this feeling, which seemed like ingratitude to my kind hostess and lover. With another, I knew it was indispensable to my returning home. One afternoon I fell asleep resting with Sibylla on the couch. I dreamt that I rose up and looked through the open window towards the little courtyard and saw a street where there was none before. A woman, her face hidden in her cloak, walked slowly along it, turning her head from side to side as though she were looking for something. She came level with me and put back the cloak from her face, and I saw that it was my sister Martha. I called to her and held out my arms to her joyfully, but she looked at me blankly as a stranger might and passed on, still searching. I woke from this dream in a fit of terrible weeping, convinced that I must go home, whatever my reception might be. Over and over I repeated this to Sibylla as she held me in her arms and wiped away the tears that streamed down my face. I'll see that you return home, she promised me at last. I'll see to it, don't worry. She kept her word. She was in this matter, as in all our transactions, just and plain spoken. She told me that I was a fool to give up the prospect of a life of comfort and dignity and ease, but that she respected if she could not understand my reasons for doing so. Generous to the last, she arranged and paid for my passage home, and tried to give me the white silk robe to take with me. I refused it, for I knew I could have no possible use for it in Bethany. And the thought of selling something that was a gift from her was distasteful to me. In the end, she prevailed on me to accept 2 presents as tokens of affection, which had grown up between us. A mirror set in a circle of pearls, and an alabaster jar cunningly decorated to suggest the coiled body of a serpent, and whose head, set with twin pearls for eyes, formed the lids. When I unscrewed the serpent's head to sniff the richly perfumed ointment inside, the body of the beast seemed to twist and writhe. When you use these, Sibylla said, think of me. We parted with sadness, knowing it was not likely that we should ever meet again. Under the protection of a group of Jewish scholars carrying copies of sacred scrolls back to Jerusalem, my journey was uneventful and safe. My companions, who had been asked by Sibylla to allow me to join their company, treated me with reserve, for they saw all too clearly what manners of woman I was. Whether they supposed rightly or wrongly, I did not care. I was only relieved to be free of annoyance and the possible inopportunity of strangers, and counted the hours until we should arrive. In Bethany, I found my father ill and dying, too stunned and frightened by his pain to know me. No welcome, no blessing, and no forgiveness could be mine. He died without uttering my name, and I grieved for myself rather than for him. Chapter 1. So there. We'll do chapter 2 next time. See ya. Hope you enjoy. Don't forget, if you like, thumbs up and subscribe. Bye-bye.